Go ahead.
Paula, thank you very much, and thank you to Herschel and the other leaders of the PMI Risk Community of Practice for inviting me to be part of this webinar. I hope you can hear me clearly. I'll carry on at this level, and if anybody has a problem, I guess Paula will probably tell me, and I'll just look in the chat box. So good day to everybody. I'm in the UK. It's springtime, the sun is shining, and it's the end of a busy day. But I'm very excited about speaking to you on this topic of risk energetics. I guess I'm full of energy, and that's as it should be. Risk management is one of the most important things we can do, and often it's not done very well. So what I'd like to do is suggest to you some ways that we can make our risk management more effective. What tends to happen is that people say, well, I'm too busy. I would do risk management if I didn't have so many other things to do. If I wasn't so busy with my proper job, with my real project tasks, then I might have time to do risk management. Of course, if you're too busy to manage risk, then you're too busy, because managing risk is one of those key things that we really have to do. And if we don't, it's likely to lead to us being stressed, with problems occurring when we should have seen them and avoided them, or opportunities being missed when we could have seen them in advance and captured them. I usually say when I'm running projects that there are only two times that I feel stressed: day and night. And maybe you feel like that too. And sometimes we need to just do something about that proactively. So I've developed this approach called risk energetics, which is about trying to find a way of injecting energy into our risk management process, both at the project level and then also at the portfolio level and right across the business. And these are the topics we're going to be covering in our webinar in the next 45 minutes or so, and I'll leave some time at the end for questions. So what I want to do is start with a very simple look, a simplified look at how energy operates in the natural world, and then apply that to the risk management process, and recognize that there are factors which reduce our energy. We call those energy sappers. They sap the energy out of our risk management process. And there are also factors that we can use to promote our energy in our risk management process. And what we need to do is find strategies for removing or reducing the energy sappers and enhancing the energy promoters. And the goal overall is to build a level of energy into the risk management process that will continue, which is sustainable. And then to make sure that it is continually renewed as we manage our various projects across the portfolio and across the business. So that's where we're going to go, and hopefully you'll find this interesting, and I'm looking forward to your questions at the end as well. So here we go. Let's start with looking at natural energy processes. Anybody who's done any physics at school or engineering maybe will recognize this curve, that if you have a pulse of energy which you enter into a system, then it just naturally over time will decay. So we have a pulse which rises, reaches a peak, and then just gradually drops away. And if we have energy sapping factors, then the energy levels can be damped to the point where they don't sustain and maybe even drop into negative energy. And we'll see in this kind of oscillating curve where we have a number of three different energy sapping factors that come into this natural energy pulse and result in it being less sustained. Now, in terms of risk management, this is a typical risk management process that you should recognize from the PMBOK Guide, Chapter 11. It's not exactly the same, but it's based on that, which has a number of stages which I'm sure you'll be familiar with. So we start with a setup phase. We call it plan risk management in the PMBOK, where we initiate the process, we define the thresholds, we define the responsibilities for risk, and so on. And then we move into a cyclic process where we identify risks, analyze their importance, determine what we're going to do, planning risk responses, then implement the responses. And just by the way, that stage of implementing responses happens to be missing from the PMBOK Chapter 11 risk process, which I think is a mistake. I told PMI, and I'm hoping that one day we'll put it back in. So anyway, we plan the risk responses, implement them, and then once we've implemented responses, we review to see if the responses worked, we update to make sure that we've got any new risks on board, and then we go round again. So, as I say, I'm sure you're familiar with that. What would happen if we overlaid this risk management process onto the natural energy curve? Well, it might look something like this. Here's the decay curve that would naturally occur with any kind of closed system that receives a pulse of energy. And we could add over that the different stages of the risk management process. So we start by initiating the process, which we call plan risk management in the PMBOK guide, and where we produce the risk management plan. As people start to get involved in risk management on their projects, there's a rise of energy. They feel quite interested and excited that we're going to have an opportunity to talk about the uncertainties that matter. And so there's a rise of energy amongst the project team as we launch the risk management process. Then we come to perhaps a workshop or some other means of identifying risk, and people are quite engaged with that. Here we have the opportunity to get things off our chest, to talk about the major threats that could affect our part of the project or the overall project, as well as good opportunities that we've spotted which could be really helpful. And people love to share those things. But things then start to go a little bit downhill when we start to talk about analysing the risks we've identified. Well, I suppose we could talk about how likely it is to occur, the probability, and we could talk about scaling the impact against the objectives with low, medium and high cost, time and quality objectives. Oh dear, this is a bit like hard work. And then the next step, we ask people to plan their responses, and the energy has fallen away even further. Haven't we finished yet? Do we really have to do this? I've given all my energy into identifying and analysing the risks. Let's just quickly think of a few things that might be helpful, write them into the risk register and move on. And finally, when we come to that all-important implementation stage, or reviewing the risks after that, well, people are really fed up. They have no more time for risk management. All the energy has dropped out, and they're back to doing their normal tasks, running the project and doing the other things that they have to do. So I think we can explain a lot of what we see in risk management in our projects by overlaying the process onto this natural decay curve. Of course, things will be even worse if we had the presence of these energy sapping factors, which would damp the energy actively in the risk management process in our project. And we find that perhaps even during risk identification, people lose interest very quickly, and that energy level stays low and maybe even becomes negative to the point where people oppose the risk management process and are hostile to it. So we have a problem. What we really want is what I call the desired curve, where we don't allow the energy levels in our risk management process to drop away. So what we're looking for is to sustain the risk management energy at a rather higher level, and that requires us to put more energy into the risk management process as we go through our projects. And you'll see there are two particular places where I think we need to have maximum energy, maximum engagement from the project team in the risk management process. And that's in the identification phase and the response planning phase. These are the two parts of the process where we need maximum energy, maximum engagement, where we need people to be thinking creatively. What could go wrong with our project? Where could we do better and things might go well? Those are the all-important questions in the identification stage, and we really need to engage with that and keep the energy up. We might be able to allow the energy to drop a little during analysis whilst we go through the routine steps of assessing probability and impact. But then again, we need an injection of energy, an injection of innovation and creativity when we start thinking about what are we actually going to do to respond to these risks. And so the plan responsive stage needs to have extra energy in it. And of course, as we get into implementation and the ongoing review, we need to keep the energy up. So I think we've got two things that we need to think about here. We need to find the factors which sap energy out of the risk process and try to remove them or reduce them. And we need to find factors that will promote energy or inject energy into the risk process to keep people engaged. If we don't do that, then we're likely to find we have problems. So here are two things that we could do to move from the natural decay or maybe the damped curve to the desired risk energy levels to make sure our risk management is effective. We can reduce the energy sappers and we can enhance the energy promoters. And those are the two areas I'd like to focus on for the rest of the webinar. If you have a house and you think about energy in your house, you'll know that it's important to understand where we could lose energy in the house, and there are a number of different places. This is a typical house in the UK where a quarter of the energy is lost through the roof, and a third of the energy is lost through the walls, and 15% is lost into the ground below. And these are interesting figures, and so we need to put insulation in our roofs in the UK. What were the energy sapping factors in our projects? And if you're like me, it's very common to hear these kinds of things that people say. Well, the risk process takes time and it costs money, and I don't know if I'm really getting value for money out of it. And the responses cost money as well, and then we're responding to things that may never happen. And anyway, I tried risk management once and it didn't really work. It's just scaring people with things that might never occur. And I'm far too busy managing issues, things that are problems already on my project. I don't have time to think about things that may never occur. And anyway, it's too late on my project because all the risks already are built in. And risk management is my day job. It's just common sense. You probably hear these kinds of excuses for not being involved in the risk process as often as I do. But each of these different excuses, or maybe reasons, have answers. And we need to be prepared to talk to people and defend the risk process against these accusations or criticisms. So yes, the risk process does take time and money, but managing risk will save more time and money because we have fewer threats turning into problems and more opportunities ending up in captured benefits and value. Yes, responses cost money, but we're spending money to save money, or we're spending money to gain more money. If people who say risk management doesn't work, we can show that it does work by doing it properly and then demonstrating the value and showing from our previously completed projects that risk management really does help. Often people who say risk management is just scaring people, what they're thinking about is things that never really happened because they weren't really risks. So what we need to do, of course, is find the real risks. And of course include the upside opportunities, those positive risks that won't scare people but will excite people. If you're too busy managing issues, where did the issues come from? Issues are risks that happened. So if we manage our risks effectively, we'll have fewer issues. If you think that all the risks are built into your project, well, if you just ignore them, it doesn't make them go away. They may be built in, but you need to assess them and decide how to respond. And people who say that risk management is just common sense, well, common sense isn't all that common, is it? And we do need to have a structured approach to managing risk to make sure that we do it well. So if you think about these energy sapping factors, they tend to come under three basic headings. There are three common themes. People are not that interested in risk management because they think it's a waste of time and it won't really help them. People are distracted from risk management by their day job, by the management of the project or the management of problems and issues. And people who think risk management doesn't work tend to become disillusioned with it and think it's not worth bothering with because it isn't going to add value. We can address each of those themes in a proactive way. We can say that if we explain what risk management is trying to do and infuse people with the value and the benefits of risk management, then they'll become more interested in seeing if it will work for them. If people are distracted from risk management because of their other things, then we need to focus the risk management process, focus their thinking on the risks, and have a concentrated time when we're not going to be distracted, we are going to look at the uncertainties that matter. And if people are disillusioned by thinking that they tried risk management but it didn't really work, well, we need to demonstrate value from our completed projects where risk management was successfully done. So reducing energy sapping factors is reasonably straightforward, I think. They're common problems, we can implement common solutions. If we don't, then we're likely to have a team that feels a bit like this. When it comes to risk management, I just can't be bothered. And of course, we really don't want that, do we? Now, what about the other thing? Not just reducing those things that take energy out of the risk process. Let's focus in a bit more detail on the things that we can actively do to inject energy into our risk management approach. And I'd like to look at this under two headings. You could, of course, just drink more coffee, and then, as it says on the t-shirt, do stupid things faster, we really want a more structured, a more considered view than that, don't we? So what can we do? First of all, we've got things that we can do within the control of the project. I'd like to suggest 3 of these things. And then I'll talk about things that are outside the project, and again, another 3 things that will inject energy into the risk process. And the first thing we can do that's within our control is to have a good risk management process. Some people's approach to risk is just a nightmare. It's a spaghetti mix of all sorts of complex arrangements and briefings and reviews and reports and cycles back and all sorts of, it's just far too difficult. What we need is something much simpler, perhaps as we've looked at before, the sort of process that's in the PMBOK guide. What we want from a good process is something which is simple, something which will enable us to maximise our efficiency and minimise that bureaucratic overhead. We also want something which is scalable and reusable. So we put templates in place that enable us to do those parts of the risk management process over again easily. And we make sure that the process is scaled to the risk challenge of the project. So we have a simple risk process for a simple project. We have a more robust risk process for a complex project. And of course, that's the purpose of the planned risk management step. So our first energy promoting factor is to make sure that our risk management process is well designed and that it's simple, reusable and scalable. What else can we do within the control of the project? We could also use process breaks within our process design. And what do I mean by a process break? Here's the desired curve that we're looking for in our risk management process, the desired energy curve. A process break is saying, well, let's just think about stopping the risk process in the middle. So we might have a risk management workshop in which we identify and analyse the risks, and then you rush on to plan the responses, but people are tired by then. So why don't we just stop the workshop and maybe have a coffee break, or maybe have a lunch break, or maybe even come back tomorrow. And then when we restart, we have a new pulse of energy when we start to plan the responses, and we get that energy level higher again. So depending on the length of your risk workshop, then we could either have if it's a half-day workshop, have a coffee break, tell people to go outside and have a walk and look at the sunshine and do something different for 15 minutes, then come back and be re-energized for the second half of the day. Or you might have a full-day workshop, in which case we take the lunch break, or a 2-day. We tend to be rather process driven. So let me suggest something else that maybe we don't think about, which is more people focused. I'd like to suggest that one of the things that adds energy to the risk management process is a good facilitator. And now the facilitator might be a defined role within your project, depending on the size of your project. So that perhaps the risk champion, the risk coordinator, the risk process manager, you might even call them a risk manager. It doesn't really matter what the name is. This is someone who is responsible for the process to make sure that it's done well. And they need to have the responsibility and the authority within the project to make things happen. They need technical skills related to project management and risk management to understand what the risks might be, plus people skills to make sure that the workshop and the group operates well together and that they gain people's buy-in and make sure that the energy levels stay up. I sometimes call the facilitator role a beneficial dictator. They will tell you what to do, but they do it for your own good. Of course, there's someone else who tells you what to do, but for your own good, and that's parents. Sorry, I went too far. Parents are very good at telling us what to do because it's good for us. And the point is that the word facilitator comes from a Latin word facilis, which means easy. The point of our facilitator, or our risk champion or risk coordinator, is to make the risk process easy. So people come into the workshop thinking, oh dear, I wish I wasn't here, I'm far too busy, I'm not quite sure what I'm doing, I don't know why I'm here. And they leave the risk workshop thinking, Well, that was quite straightforward. I'm glad I went. I got some really useful information about my project, about the threats and opportunities. I'm glad I came. And that is the role of the facilitator, to make it easy for people to do what they need to do. There's a third thing to think about in terms of adding energy or enhancing energy within the project, and that is to make sure that it's properly resourced. Now, resources for projects include people, of course, and I've used this little abbreviation of SQUEP, which some people use in some industries. It means suitably qualified and experienced personnel. So for the risk process, we need to have people who know what they're talking about. People who will understand what the risks are, people who understand how they could affect the project, people who understand what a risk is and what the risk process is for, and people who understand how to run that process effectively. There are other resources, of course. There's time. We need to make time within the project to look at the risks, to understand them and develop responses and implement those things. And of course, we also need money. The risk process is not free, and risk responses are not free. So the project needs to have a line in its budget for running the risk management process, and it needs to have a budget line for implementing agreed risk processes. So just to clarify again, and I see that Jaeger's asked the question, what does SQUEP stand for? It stands for Suitably Qualified and Experienced Personnel. So perhaps someone will just, there we go, type it in. Thank you very much, Raj. Okay, so that's in terms of internal factors. The things that we can do include having a well-designed process, having a facilitator who's skilled, and having resources made available within the project. Now what about external factors? Things that can help us more widely beyond the project in the organisational environment that makes risk management easier and better. Well, one of these would be an infrastructure. We want to have a level of infrastructure, which means tools and techniques and templates and training, all of those things, which all happen to start with a T, a level of infrastructure which is appropriate to the risk challenge and which the project can afford and the organisation can afford. And what we want to have for each project is a level of infrastructure that matches how risky the project is, which means that infrastructure needs to be scalable. It's possible to have too much infrastructure, and it's possible to have too little infrastructure. We call this, what we want is the Goldilocks level, which is not too much, not too little, but just right. And if you don't know the story, the children's story of Goldilocks and the Three Bears, you need to Google it and have a read. I think it's quite a well-known story in a number of different cultures. If we look at the two pictures of the scaffolding, you can see that the picture on the left seems to have rather too much support, and there's so much support that they haven't got a place to build anything. On the other hand, the picture in the middle shows too little support, that actually we don't really have enough to enable us to do anything at all. And the infrastructure for our risk process, the tools, techniques, templates and training, can be so much that we have a massive bureaucratic overhead and it strangles and stifles the risk management process. Or we can have a level of infrastructure which is too little and it doesn't support the process in the way that we need, and the process will fall over without the right support, without the right tools and techniques, templates and training. So the second thing that the organisation can do, which is outside of our project control, is to make sure that we have the right level of infrastructure to support the risk process. And one last thing, which our second thing, which I think is important, is to have an organisational culture which is risk aware, which understands that risk is normal and risk is manageable and risk is involved in every project and every activity, and we need to address it. Culture means the beliefs and values and knowledge that we share within a group. And risk culture is those shared beliefs, value and knowledge about risk. So what do we think about risk? Is it a good thing? Is it a bad thing? Is it something that we welcome or something we're afraid of? And how does the organisation lead in terms of setting those values and beliefs? Values and beliefs are very important because they lead to repeated behaviour. They influence what we do. So because of our culture, it will affect the way that we actually behave, the way that we act when risk turns up in our projects. And that's driven by the underlying attitudes toward risk. I use the ABC model to understand this. Attitudes, the way we think, determines behaviour, the way we act, and repeated behaviour forms a culture. And that's true of risk as well. The way we think about risk will affect the way we behave towards risk, which will in turn build a risk culture within our project and our organisation. And what we need to have is a culture which is aware of risk, recognises its existence, and tries to do something about it. So that's the second thing that the wider organisation needs to set in place, and leadership and senior management has an important role for that. Now, the third thing, management support. It's important that management visibly supports the risk management process in its projects. So here we're talking about the project sponsor or the project owner, maybe the project director, maybe the chief executive or the finance director. At this level, we need to have people a person called the corporate risk sponsor, or maybe a corporate risk champion. And this is a very important role for somebody who will champion risk management in the wider organisation. And what we need to do is to make sure that that management support influences the way we make decisions at all levels within the organisation, not just at the project level, but also for our programmes and portfolios, also for our departments, divisions and functions, also for our senior management team and board. Everyone needs to be aware of the risks they're taking, see how they could affect their objectives, and do something about it. I don't know if you've ever met this character here. He's a famous film star. His name is Borat. It's actually a comedy film about a guy who really seems to think he's doing the right thing, but probably isn't. He's over-enthusiastic in the wrong direction. And we really don't want a Borat on our risk management processes. We really need somebody who has a positive influence on the way risk is managed within the project. So, what have we found? We've found 3 internal factors that promote energy and 3 external factors that promote energy. And my view is that if we take the energy sappers away, and if we promote the things that enhance energy within our projects, risk management will be more sustained, people will be more engaged, people will find it more effective, and actually more fun, more enjoyable as well. Well, let's move in the last 10 minutes or so of this webinar to think about these 2 words, sustainable and renewable. Because I think it's all very well for us to do it well once on our projects, but how do we keep it going? And how do we make sure it learns and grows and develops across our portfolio and across our organisation? Let's think first about sustainability. Often we'll find that at the beginning of a project, people can be quite engaged with the risk management process because it's a new project, there's lots of threats and opportunities, we want to make sure that we engage with those and deal with them as quickly as we can and as effectively as we can. And then we get on with the project and we're into the design phase and we're into the execution phase and the development phase and finally our testing and acceptance and handover, and we forget all about risk. We did that at the beginning of the project. What we need to do is to sustain the level of risk throughout the project life cycle, because risks can arise at any stage. Risk management is cyclic, it's iterative, it's repeated, and we find what we should have in the risk management process, as stated in the PMBOK guide and other risk standards, is an ongoing cycle of risk reviews and risk responses. And very often that energy just drops away as we get to monthly or quarterly risk reviews. People lose interest. We do need to maintain energy throughout the project life cycle and wider within the business, not just the first time through. What we don't want to have is what I call moonwalking. And by moonwalking, you know what Michael Jackson used to do when Moonwalking looks a little bit like this, and here's a guide if you want to know how to do it. Moonwalking is the appearance of moving forwards while actually going backwards. And a lot of our projects are like that. We seem to be making progress, but actually things are just unravelling and unwinding. More problems, we're using up all our contingency, and it looks like we're making progress through our reports and so on, but actually it's getting a lot worse. I would say moonwalking should be banned on all projects. I hope you don't try doing it. It doesn't work. So we need to sustain our level of risk energy throughout the project life cycle. How are we going to do that? Well, here's the first cycle that we might have at the beginning of our project. The risk management process would identify, analyse, develop responses and implement them. And we've seen that we want this kind of sustained risk energy profile where energy is given to the identification and response planning stages. And we'll maintain a higher level of energy, not quite as high as those two, but a high level of energy for our analysis and response implementation stages. But what about the rest of the project? Perhaps our first risk update will include a risk review, and then we'll develop some new responses, and we'll have to implement those. And then we'll have another review and implement stage, and another as we go on through the project. Sustainable risk energy is about maintaining these levels throughout the reviews. And that means we need to give particular attention to those energy promoting factors at the start of each risk review cycle. If we don't intentionally think about adding energy to the risk process at each new risk review, then people will lose interest because they've done risk management, they did that in the initiation phase of the project. Well, we do need to keep thinking about it and to raise that energy level through the things that we've talked about earlier. And that's how we can sustain risk energy, by injecting it as we go through. What does renewable energy mean in the context of an organisation? Well, we need to think about making sure that the energy levels for risk management are maintained across the whole portfolio of projects. Risk is not just a one-off, single-shot problem. We need to manage risk actively on every element within our portfolio of projects, and not just do it for one project. And what we should be seeing for the organisation is overall, as we become more mature in managing risk, the organisation should learn from its past, and we should see increasing commitments and buy-in for risk management. Based on the fact that we've seen it work. On our previous projects, we've seen it deliver value. And so we have a positive reinforcement, a virtuous cycle, a good cycle, where one project infuses the next project to manage risk even better. And that's what I mean by renewable risk energy. So here we have one project in our portfolio, and we have a cycle of initial risk identification and response planning, and then a review and another review and another review, and then at the end of the project, of course, the energy level drops to zero as we finish the project with our lessons learned review, our post-project review. What about the next project? Well, if we're a learning organisation, if we're maturing in our risk management capability, then we should implement the same kind of risk management process on our next project, but we hope that the level of engagement and buy-in and enthusiasm would be even higher. So here's a second project which has an initial phase of identifying response planning, and now we have 4 risk reviews, and at the end of the project, the energy level can fall away to zero as we complete the project. And then we would have another project where perhaps again we think of having a higher level of energy and engagement. Renewable risk energy means that as a learning organisation, there is an increasing level of risk management maturity, of risk management capability, of risk management competence. And so as we continue to manage projects through our portfolio, then we get to know what works well on our projects, what stops us managing risk well, what helps us to manage risk better, and we can become more mature in the way that we do it and manage risk more effectively. So that's what we mean by renewable risk energy, making sure that we grow it across the portfolio. So let me wrap up just now, and we'll leave some time at the end for questions. I think there have been some questions posted in the chat box. Now is the time for you to put extra questions in place if you have them. If you just put the word question in capital letters at the beginning of what you type, then Paula and Herschel will pick it out and make it visible to me in a separate chat box that you can't see. So let's wrap up here. what do we mean by risk energetics? We recognise that the natural process, any natural process, including risk management, is subject to a natural decay curve where the initial pulse of energy input is just lost over time. And if we have negative factors in our risk process which sap the energy out, then we have a damped curve where the energy falls away particularly quickly and may even become negative to the point where people oppose the risk management process. There is a desired energy curve where we need to inject energy in to make sure that we don't lose it at the key points in our project. And that requires two things to be done. The first is to identify the energy sapping factors that take energy out of the risk management process and to reduce those and hopefully remove them. The three that we identified were people not being interested in risk management because they don't think it works, with people being distracted from risk management because they think it's a waste of time and they have too much other busy things to do, and people being disillusioned with risk management because they don't see it adding any value. And so we talked about addressing that through education and training to focus people, to make people more interested in risk management, to see how it can help them. We talked about focusing the risk process very carefully to make sure that people are not distracted by issues, problems, or the day job. And we talked about demonstrating value to make sure that we counter that disillusionment for people who thought they did risk management, but it didn't really work for them. The second part of our solution to make sure we maintain the desired level of energy within the risk management process is to enhance those energy promoting factors. Some of them are within our control, those internal factors, the way we design the risk management process. It needs to be simple, it needs to be reusable, it needs to be scalable. We need to make sure we have skilled facilitators with the right technical and people skills to make the process easy, to help people through the process and do it effectively. And we need to provide within the project the resources that we need for the risk management process. The time, the money and the people to put into the risk process so that we have time to, and money to, energy to identify risks, develop responses and implement them. And then we saw some wider external factors outside of our project, more organisational factors, which need to be in place to increase the energy level, increase engagement in risk management for our projects. One is provision of the right level of infrastructure. Not too much, not too little, just right. The level which matches the risk challenge of our projects. And infrastructure means tools and techniques and templates and training. We need to make sure that we have a risk-aware, a risk-mature culture. The way that we think and believe about risk will shape the way that we act towards it. And senior management have a particular role in forming the culture that our projects are embedded in, and that includes the risk culture. The way we think about risk will determine the way we act towards risk, which will build the risk culture. And then the third external factor is to make sure that we have the right level of management support, which is visible, which is senior, which is committed, which people can see means something, and so that will encourage them to do risk management properly. If we reduce those energy sappers, if we enhance those energy promoters, and do that throughout the life cycle of our project, we'll have a sustainable approach to managing risk within our project. If we do it for every project in the portfolio and learn from our past experience, so we have a maturing level of risk competence, then we'll have renewable risk management. It will refresh itself as we go on from one project to the next, as we learn from the past to benefit the future. So I think risk energetics is a useful way, it's a picture, it's a metaphor, to think about how we can intentionally address the risk management process, to recognise that people get bored and tired, and to do something about it. And if we do it in an effective way using these things that we've talked about in this presentation, I think we can create a sustainable and renewable high-energy risk management process that really works. Well, I hope you found that useful and interesting. I'm very happy to take questions now. These are my contact details, and I'm happy for you to take down my email address and to send me an email if you have other questions after we've left the webinar. If you go to the Risk Doctor website, riskdoctor.com, on the contact page, there's a question form where you can submit a question and I'll receive it wherever I am in the world and respond within a couple of days. And so there's lots. Over to you.